Hi, can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay, we're just getting started with our first session. We're gonna take a couple minutes as people join in. And we'll begin in just a second. We'll begin just at 12:30. Apologies. How's everybody doing?
Hi, Fatima.
Hello. Okay, one more minute so that we get started just on time. And everybody from our first panelists are here. I think we're just waiting for Sonia. So we'll give her a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. I think she was in a different meeting, so she might be joining in a couple minutes, but we'll give her a couple minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Fatima, for organizing us.
Okay, let's see. There's a question. Somebody asked if I could hear the, oh, trust, I can't. Let's see. Okay, I think it's 12:30, so we can get started. We're just missing one of our panelists for this first session, but she can join us in a little bit. But first, just give me one second, get me myself situated. I want to thank everybody for being here today. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for joining our Earth Day dialogue brought to you by the Office of the Mayor of Tucson. My name is Fatima Luna. My pronouns are she, her, and they. I am the Environmental Sustainability Advisor to Mayor Romero, and I would be the moderator today. I am zooming in from my home in South Tucson, traditional lands of the Tohono O'odham people. So today we are celebrating 50 years of Earth Day, where millions of Americans took the streets to fight for environmental protection. But prior to 1970, indigenous communities around the world protected, and in fact, they still continue to protect our environment through the traditional ecological knowledge and practices. So the purpose of this webinar is to have a dialogue on the community-wide initiatives and solutions for environmental sustainability and climate action in the city of Tucson. We want to recognize the work that environmental stewards and leaders from different sectors are currently doing, and also discuss potential solutions that we collectively need to implement to mitigate the effects of climate change in Tucson. Before I begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. So today's webinar is divided into two sessions, each lasting about an hour. In the first session, we will hear from Mayor Romero and university experts and practitioners. In the second session, we will learn about the work that local community groups are doing to protect the environment. The webinar is being recorded and we will share later today. We ask our guest speakers to mute yourselves if you're not speaking to avoid background noise. We also invite questions from the audience. Please type your questions in the for the panelists in the Q&A box. You can direct your questions to specific panelists by typing their names. I would ask the questions at the end of each section, and I will try to get as many as I possibly can. And also the panelists are able to read and directly respond to your questions. So give me, okay, there it is. So I want to welcome our first set of panelists, Mayor Regina Romero, Professor Sonia Klinsky, and Trevor Ledbetter. Mayor Regina Romero received a bachelor's degree from the University of Arizona and holds a postgraduate certificate from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. For 12 years, she served as city council member for Ward 1. In November 2019, she was elected Tucson mayor, becoming the first woman and the first Latina mayor in Tucson, as well as the only Latina mayor in the 50 largest US cities. Mayor Romero is an advocate for the environment, affordable housing, infrastructure, investment, immigrant and workers' rights, and access to high quality education. We also have, or she should be joining soon, Sonia Klinsky. She is an associate professor at the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. She's been involved in climate justice, scholarship, and policy engagement since 2005. She has multiple publications on climate justice within the international and domestic arenas, including in transactional justice, the utility of feminist scholarship to climate justice, strategies for embedding justice into climate action design, and public engagement with climate justice. Our third panelist is Trevor Ledbetter. He's the director of the Office of Sustainability at the University of Arizona. He's an advocate for the institutionalization of sustainability across the university and using the campus as a living lab and model for experimental education to equip students for global challenges. Trevor holds 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Arizona, one in ecology and evolutionary biology, and the second in environmental science. And he's actually currently pursuing a master's of business administration at the university as well. At this time, I want to hand the screen and the mic over to Mayor Romero, who is going to discuss the ongoing initiatives the city is implementing to promote environmental sustainability and climate readiness in Tucson. Mayor Regina Romero, the floor is all yours. I'm going to mute myself.
Mute myself. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this Earth Day webinar. Happy 50th year of Earth Day. So important to celebrate. And I'll say that before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the difficult times we are going through right now, and that I value our collective effort to help slow the spread. I also admire the incredible work our frontline workers are doing to keep our communities safe. And so it's important for me to acknowledge the difficult times that we're going through, all of us as a community and as a country. At the same time, I believe it's important to continue to have a dialogue on environmental and climate issues that have affected our communities before COVID-19 and will continue to impact our communities in the future. In fact, COVID-19 has taught us that one, science matters and must be taken seriously, and two, that delayed response to issues such as these cost lives and hurts our economy. Three, that we need a global coordinated response and policy measures to combat the global climate crisis that we're living through right now. As the third fastest warming city in the United States, Tucson needs to take bold and swift action to combat climate change and foster a resilient community. And so it's important to acknowledge that we are taking steps in the right direction, right? We have been moving forward with climate action in our city, but I ran on a bold climate action agenda, and even though we're going through this crisis now, we need to continue planning for and fighting for a swift response for climate action. So let me see if I can change the slide. Okay. Let's see. So over the years, the city of Tucson has implemented sustainability measures in different departments. Today, I'm going to highlight some of the city initiatives in 3 departments in the city of Tucson. Let's see. Let's move forward. I'm having some technical difficulties, so I'm sorry, bear with me.
Mayor,
All right.
I would be changing the slide, so you can just say next. I can do that for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So through several conservation programs, the Tucson Water has conserved about 2.6 billion gallons of water over the last decade. If you can move to slide 4, some of the water conservation opportunities that Tucson Water offers the community members include free installation of high efficiency toilets, which has served about 4,500 low-income homes and saved close to 60 million gallons of water since 2010. This particular program is near and dear to my heart because this is something that, that as a council member, I push for. We want to make sure that when we're thinking about conserving water and serving our residents, that we are doing everything in our power to serve equitably and serve the most vulnerable communities in our city, and that includes low-income communities. We also have the emergency repairs program that repairs or replaces leaks and plumbing fixtures or plumbing lines for homes with low-income households. The rainwater harvesting grant and loan program that has installed more than 230 projects with total tank capacity of 280,000 gallons of rainwater harvesting. And then we also have the Smartscape, a free bilingual educational training for landscapers to increase water efficiency in our urban landscapes. And then finally, the Santa Cruz River Heritage Project that the city of Tucson instituted so that we could use recycled water to refurbish and reflourish the Santa Cruz River. And that has been a beautiful, amazing program that the city of Tucson has been able to do. After the 70 years, this portion of the Santa Cruz River, if you look at the slide, it looks in the difference that it makes. This portion of the Santa Cruz River has a perennial flow once again, in addition to recharging our aquifer for later use. This recycled water is also supporting native vegetation, is a habitat corridor for wildlife, and provides outdoor recreational opportunities for people. Reuse of treated wastewater is one of Tucson's more significant water conservation tools that we have in our toolbox. Slide 6, which is the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Program, is a new resident-funded project to build new and maintain existing projects that capture stormwater runoff to divert into vegetated areas. Let's see, the green infrastructure projects generate an array of social ecological benefits, including reducing flooding, filtering stormwater pollutants, creating wildlife habitat, promoting recreation and mobility, among other benefits. While the new projects are expected to be equally distributed across wards, climate vulnerable communities and communities with low tree canopy and heat vulnerable communities will be prioritized. On to the next, thank you. The Department of Environmental and General Services has also implemented a series of sustainable solutions, including solar power installations, fleet electrification, recycling programs, and green energy revolving funds. So if we could move to slide 8, thank you. The City of Tucson has completed 27 solar installations at several parks and recreation facilities that generate 9 megawatts of new solar energy and provide shade for over 3,500 parking spaces since 2018. 13 additional sites are under construction and some are close to completion, which will amount to about 3 megawatts of additional solar power. Over 50 solar sites have been equipped to support future electric charging stations for city-owned vehicles and public use, powering 100% of the residential trash and recycling collection vehicles by compressed natural gas instead of diesel. This conversion reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 20% and the city's fuel cost by approximately 90 cents per mile. And then we have the Green Energy Revolving Loan Fund. It was created in September 2019 to implement future projects and initiatives to reduce energy consumption and increase sustainability in city facilities. If we could move to, okay, we are in slide 9, thank you. In addition to the ongoing projects mentioned, the Department of Environmental and General Services is also developing a methane gas recovery and reutilization program to recapture the methane generated from Los Reales landfill so that it could be extracted, cleaned to pipeline quality standards, and used to power compressed natural gas fleets. That includes Suntran buses. This project provides an opportunity to create a closed loop sustainable system where the city utilizes its own waste to power its waste trucks, bridge the transition to our bus fleet at electrification and reduce our carbon footprint. We are also working with the University of Arizona to operate a composting facility at Los Reales landfill to increase our waste diversions and reuse options. We expect to be operating by the end of 2020, hopefully, and initially collect, process green waste from commercial businesses, which is something that we've been looking forward to for a long time. Lastly, we are working with Tucson Clean and Beautiful to develop and implement our native tree nursing farm to grow trees for our Million Trees campaign and support our community-wide reforestation actions. If we can move to slide 10, thank you. The Department of Transportation and Mobility, which we just changed the name of the department in January to include mobility, has also taken action steps to support sustainability in the city of Tucson. If we can move to slide 11. Thank you. Currently, 68 city buses are powered with CNG, which is compressed natural gas, saving the city over $2 million a year. 20 additional compressed natural gas buses will be delivered this July. We are currently testing 1 electric bus and are expected to get 5 more electric buses by April 2021, which is hopefully by the end of April, we'll have the 5 buses, electric buses, so that we can test drive them and see how they react to Tucson summers. The DTM and Suntran have applied for grant money to order an additional 5 electric buses. Our intention is to electrify all the city's transit fleet in the coming years. We have converted over 20,000 street lights to LED, which is estimated to reduce energy consumption by 70% and save the city of Tucson about $180,000 a year per month. I'm sorry. Additionally, the LED conversion is also reducing light pollution by decreasing light glow by 7%. We have converted, we are over a year into the implementation of the Complete Streets policy, which will provide safer and more appealing environments for people to walk, bike, and use public transportation in the city of Tucson. It also incorporates guidelines for green stormwater infrastructure projects, and the street design manual is currently posted for public review. I encourage you all to provide feedback and make your voice count. The department is also amid the Move Tucson Transportation Planning Initiative, which I'm very excited about. Thus far, over 2,000 Tucsonans have participated in the process of setting priorities to improve multimodal transportation opportunities in Tucson. Based on preliminary results, sustainable transportation options are emerging as important community considerations, which is very exciting for me. This fall, we will begin the construction of phase 1 of Prop 407 connections projects, which provide about 120 miles of low-stress walking and biking corridors with green stormwater infrastructure features, connecting people to schools, shopping, recreation areas, and parks, and hopefully jobs as well. Finally, we have new mobility options, including the e-scooters in the city of Tucson. Since the launch of the program in September 2019, over 205,000 e-scooter trips have been taken, reducing car driving and ride-hailing trips. Under the To-Go Bike Share program, over 63,000 trips have been taken since November of 2017. 22% of members are low-income folks participating in discounted To-Go for All program. Close to, close to 114,000 miles have been biked, with an estimated of over 100,000 pounds of CO2 emissions saved from people using To-Go. And then finally, in slide 12, thank you, planning and development services. Let's see. We are, Planning and Development Services Department is working on different ordinances in the city of Tucson that will change the way we do business and the way we build in the city of Tucson. The first one is an urban agriculture ordinance, and let's see. I don't have that information. Let me see if I can find it. Alrighty, so we're working on an urban agriculture ordinance for the city of Tucson to adopt. We have worked diligently to provide a community garden rate for Tucson Water. The next one is a transit-oriented infill development, which we are working on in the city of Tucson so that we encourage density. The infill incentive district in the city of Tucson offers developers different incentives so that they can build density, and the more density we build, the more transit-oriented development we see, the more people can use our transit to go to school, to work, and their necessary needs in the city of Tucson. We have also worked on an adaptive reuse program, which encourages adaptive reuse of older and historic buildings in the city of Tucson. What that does is that we reuse buildings and give the ability to people in the city of Tucson building or wanting to reuse an older structure. We give incentives so that we make it easier for them to reuse that older building. That has the effect of reusing buildings and not having to knock them down and fill our landfills with waste. Also, we're working on an electric vehicle charging station. I just heard from our Planning and Development Services Director, Scott Clark, that he is expecting to have an electric vehicle charging station ordinance in front of Mayor and Council by June. If we could move on, thank you so much. And lastly, we're one of the fastest warming cities in the United States. And we must continue leading and building a climate resilient city with environmental and sustainable solutions. We recognize that more is needed to meet the ambitious goals under the Paris Agreement and to ensure that our city projects prioritize frontline communities and those vulnerable to climate change. I've always said that climate change affects the most vulnerable communities first, right? They are the front lines of climate change. We have seen research that those that are affected the most are low-income communities, communities of color, older adults, children, and women. And so we have to look at climate change not just as something that is affecting our environment and something that is affecting our biological diversity in this world, but that it is also a public health issue. And so as we continue to plan, and hopefully the next speakers will talk about this in the second session, we will also have the opportunity to discuss what the future needs in terms of planning and prioritizing, but we should look at climate change as a public health issue that affects the most vulnerable communities and have an eye to equity when we're discussing climate change in the city. Thank you so much, Fatima, for letting me present.
Yes, thank you so much, Mayor, for your continued efforts to be, for Tucson to be a climate resilient city. So I have a couple questions for you. And the first one is a large component of your campaign platform was the environment. I was wondering if you can give us an update on the actions that you have taken so far to advance your environmental agenda and climate action policies.
Well, I'm very excited to first and foremost introduce you, Fatima, as our climate change and sustainability advisor to the mayor's office. This particular position in the mayor's office was I thought of as a potential partnership with the University of Arizona and Arizona State University so that we can tap on the research and the studies and the continuous work that's being done by our amazing educational institutions in both Phoenix and Tucson, both ASU and U of A, to help lead us as a city with the research that is being done there and bridge that research so that we can put it to work. And so you're one of the very important steps, Fatima, for my office to have created this position with you and in partnership with the University of Arizona and ASU. Also, I've become part of the Climate Mayors. In the first month in office, I became a member of the Climate Mayors, which is a network of U.S. city leaders committed to fighting climate change through the Paris Climate Agreement framework. So, and then the other very exciting piece that I've worked on and we launched already is the Million Trees campaign, which aims to plant 1 million trees by 2030 to help mitigate the effects of climate change. And so my family and I kicked off the campaign by planting the first tree in our house, in our neighborhood. I dedicated that tree in the memory of my dad, who passed away 4 years ago. And we are distributing through the wonderful partnership that we have with Trees for Tucson, 50 other drought-tolerant trees that we want to make sure Tucsonans plant in their neighborhoods. And so I want to thank Trees for Tucson for their partnership, and they will be a very important piece of our Million Trees campaign puzzle. I know Katie Gannon is going to join us for the second session. We are also listening and working with our youth organizers to declare the climate emergency here in Tucson. But we didn't want the climate emergency to just be a paper resolution. We want that climate emergency, and we're working with our departments right now. It's taking a little bit of time, and we wanted to kick off our climate emergency yesterday at Mayor and Council, but because of the COVID-19 urgencies that we've had to attend to, we couldn't put it on yesterday's meeting. But what we want to do is we want to attach metrics to that resolution. We want to make sure that that resolution has actionable items. And so it is being delayed, but we are not forgetting about it, and we're not ignoring it, and we're working diligently to put metrics in that resolution as we continue. And finally, we're developing a process to put together a climate action plan for the city of Tucson in coordination with all city departments, experts in our community, members of and stakeholders. We will identify the most ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Tucson. And those targets or goals will be tied to specific actions and metrics to monitor progress and make ourselves accountable as a city. We will be intentional in including the diverse voices that reflect Tucson's social fabric, and centering the voices of frontline and vulnerable communities is something that I've always wanted to do.
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate your presentation and answering these questions. At this point, I would like to move on to the second presenter, just because we're running a little bit late in time, but thank you. So I just want to make sure, is Sonia, Professor Sonia Klinsky, connected already?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Will you be able to share your video so we can see you?
Do you have my slides already? It would probably be easiest if you had them on your deck. I emailed them to you.
Yes, I have them.
I'll just ask you to advance. Is that possible?
Yep.
Great. I think that's just going to be easier than trying to share my screen with everybody. So thank you, everyone, for inviting me. Fatima, if you could just give me a wave when I think I'll be on time, but when you want me to stop talking, just like wave Natalie and I will stop. So I'm delighted to be here. I am a professor at Arizona State University. I am currently not in Arizona because the borders closed and I was visiting family in Canada, so I have been stuck in Canada. So hello from the north. I've been working on climate and justice issues since 2005, and it's really a pleasure to hear so much what's happening in Tucson. I want to preface my remarks. I will talk a little bit about some big ideas about strategies for integrating justice into climate planning. I'm going to keep my ideas at the level kind of fairly broad, because one thing I've learned from working with different communities is that everyone knows their own community best. And so I'm certainly not going to tell you what to do in Tucson. You obviously have that well under control, and all of the various community groups and participants. I see there's lots of participants in this webinar, and so each one of those community groups has your own piece of the puzzle to add. But I'm hoping that the ideas I can offer are ones that I've learned from looking at lots of examples, and maybe they'll help you spark thinking that's relevant to you. So that's really my big hope here. If I have that next slide here, Fatima. So let's first talk about why do we really care about justice and climate change? And so for some of you, this might be obvious. Well, like, of course we care about justice and of course we care about climate change. However, I've been working on this for a while and it's getting less common now, but when I first started, people would say, well, I understand why you care about justice. And I understand why you care about climate change, but how are they related? And I've argued for many years that actually we can't really talk about addressing climate change without talking about justice. And so I'm going to outline a couple of reasons why I think we absolutely have to put justice at the heart of thinking about climate change action. So the first is principle-based. So we might just really prefer to live in a more just world. We might feel that the world has problems and we don't like what we see. We don't like it that some people are harmed more than others. We don't like it that some people are more vulnerable than others. We don't like it that some people may have resources to protect themselves and other people don't. And that's a very strong compulsion in all of us. We all want to be part of the best society we can be part of. And it's very hard to argue that the best society is one which is profoundly unjust. And so we have very deep moral reasons to think that we would want a more just society. One of the ways this often is exhibited is concern for those who are most vulnerable. And I would like to pick up on the mayor mentioned that we do have vulnerability in our communities. And I would ask everyone to think a little bit about your own community, Tucson, and who is the most vulnerable in Tucson and why. We often think about vulnerability as something that just is. This person has blue eyes, this person has brown eyes. Vulnerability just is. Well, let's think about that some more. Vulnerability is in fact created through ongoing systems that privilege some people and disadvantage others. And so when we're talking about vulnerability in our community, we may need to look at some of the underlying reasons why particular groups are facing the kinds of particular harms that they're being faced. And so it's an invitation to think about the whole community and think about who already gets who's already dealing with the most disadvantage and who already gets the most privilege and why. And what can the city do in terms of how that's going to intersect with climate change. We see this with the COVID situation where we see certain populations much more vulnerable to COVID than others. And that's not necessarily because of any kind of biological reason. It's because some people have fewer resources to deal with it, are put in more vulnerable positions, and have less capacity to avoid infection. And so just like that, we can think about climate is not going to affect everybody equally, and we need to think about vulnerability right front and center in the conversation. Now, another reason to think about justice and climate change is the political reality, right? Climate change is a very difficult issue to address. It may ask some people to change behaviors or businesses to change the way they do things. Sometimes there's huge benefits in that, and sometimes change itself is scary and people resist change because they don't know what to do. They're worried. They don't know what's going to happen. And so we have to realize that political perceptions of what we think is fair or just is actually central to political action. So first of all, no entity, whether it be a person or a business or a city, is going to do something they think is fundamentally unfair to themselves. That's just very difficult. And so if we don't take seriously when businesses or community members come to us and say, this isn't fair to us, if that's not really listened to understand why and how those entities feel it's not fair to them, it's going to be very, very hard to have any meaningful climate action. And so the whole notion, I know Fatima, you and I have spoken about this, the initial idea of highly participatory, inclusive thinking about what is the most fair way to do this in Tucson in light of the specificities of Tucson in terms of which companies you have there, which kinds of communities you have there, which kinds of concerns you have there, whose voices have to be at the table, is an absolutely essential part of this. And that's just for a sort of a realpolitik reality that you will not get really serious action on climate change without a very inclusive approach to climate change. There's just no shortcuts here. You have to include people from the very beginning. Another reason why we might want to think about justice in climate change is to actually understand climate change, or even understand the pros and cons of action. So one of the things that we've learned from looking at justice and climate change and doing policy analysis to understand climate policy is that unless we understand that people are at very different levels of vulnerability, very different levels of resources. Unless you take that knowledge into the process of looking at impacts of a policy, you don't actually understand how the policy is going to impact people. So for instance, if a certain policy is going to make it more difficult for, let's say, a low-income community to, get to their job, that has a much more serious impact on that population than a different population. Or let's say a particular policy is going to move air quality harms or benefits. We need to understand who's already vulnerable in order to understand if this is a problem, is this not a problem. Without recognizing that going into this problem, people are at very different levels, we cannot do a good analysis of what's going to happen once we enact the policy. And so if we don't start our conversation about policy options with a recognition that not everyone is equal in our society, we have a very high risk of doing more harm to the most vulnerable people. And so we need to really build that into our thinking about climate and justice. So that's why I think any conversation about climate policy really needs to have this justice element built in from the very beginning, because that's the way that you're going to both sort of embody our goals for a just society. It's how we're going to make sure that we have everyone on board, and it's going to be how we're going to make sure that actions don't harm people who are already vulnerable. Can I have the next slide, Fatima, please? Now, another thing I thought might be useful in terms of a contribution I can make to the various people who are participating today is a framework for justice that I've used again and again and again. And I really like this framework because I think it's very flexible and it allows us to ask really interesting questions. And I think it's in that asking interesting questions that help us make better policies. And so this question is, well, okay, justice is important, but how do we actually build justice into the analysis? I just said we have to build justice in, and you might be saying, yeah, okay, but how? So I'm going to suggest that we think about 3 different kinds of justice. And I learned this from a scholar named Nancy Fraser, who thought a lot about how do we deal with some of the big problems in societies in terms of injustices. And so one is this idea of distribution. So we can ask, how are the possible costs and benefits distributed to different groups of people? So this is often financial. You might say, well, who's going to save the most money? Who's not going to save the most money? But it's also other things too, right? So the mayor was speaking about electric buses, depending on where and I don't know enough about Tucson, forgive me, but depending on where your recharging stations are, one of the benefits of electric buses is it can really reduce air quality in particularly vulnerable populations, where before you used to have transit hubs where it had a really high concentration of emissions. And so this is the case in Phoenix, for instance. I don't know if it's a case in Tucson. I see the mayor kind of nodding, so it's possible that it's similar. But so if we wanted to think about the good here, the good is how do we reduce air quality, or how do we improve air quality? How do we reduce emissions for everybody, but particularly for those populations who are already suffering the worst air quality, which is we know is not evenly distributed in our communities. So that's a distribution question. So there's going to be both some good things that come from climate policy, like reducing air pollution. There also might be some harms, like some things are going to be more expensive. So how do we decide who's going to pay for that? What's a fair distribution of costs and benefits? But that's only one part of the justice question. The second one, remember I just spoke about the importance of having people involved, is how do we really design decision processes that include everybody? That might include things like language access. It might include things like thinking about low-income populations and trying to figure out how to get people involved in decision making. That might involve things like providing childcare so that different populations can attend meetings. It might involve things like holding meetings in places where you might not normally have a meeting so that people can actually come. It might mean thinking about what kind of information you provide and how you provide that information so that it's actually accessible to everybody. It might be all kinds of elements that are built into thinking about how do you really get the kind of engagement that you need. And so that's a very, very important part of the entire climate justice element. If you want to have the whole community involved, you're going to have to think through how exactly do different populations within your community engage with the city, and how are you going to reach all of those populations. This becomes particularly complicated and important when you may have populations who have limited access or who have limited trust in government. So if you have large numbers of undocumented populations, for instance, who may be very worried about engaging with government, but yet who are some of the most vulnerable in your community, you may need to think about those populations explicitly. The last one is this issue of recognition. Now, recognition, I'm going to talk about a little bit more just because it's, on one hand, absolutely crucial, but it's also a little bit more abstract. So sometimes people haven't thought about this one. But I'm going to suggest that it's one of the most powerful ways to think about justice when you're trying to design a new policy. So recognition comes from the idea that how we see each other is central to every other element of any political process. So how are groups of people seen or characterized? How do we see someone as relevant, and how do we decide who is not relevant to any given policy process? Can you have the next slide, Fatima? Because I'm going to go through this in a little bit more depth. So examples of recognition and justice would be, what are the processes that we put in place to make sure that we're seeing everybody who needs to be seen in a way that makes sense? So that might include things like, are we going to include future generations in a policy analysis, for instance? We know that climate change is going to affect people several hundred years into the future. So how do you include future generations in any kind of a policy analysis? Do you have young people, for instance, who can come to the table? Some other cities or even countries have appointed people to represent the future, since we know the future can't speak for themselves. Might you include someone like that whose only job is to say, well, yes, but wait a minute. In 100 years, your citizens are going to be worried about X, Y, Z. What about those considerations? How do you set the right geographic scope? Tucson borders around a number of tribal areas, for instance. How are you going to include those in your city planning? Those are very, very important populations, very important people. How do you set the boundaries of who's considered part of the process and who's not? Which kinds of issues you're going to talk about? Which ones aren't you going to talk about? Obviously, a city has limited resources, and you're going to have to make some difficult decisions about what's in and what's out of your plan. But thinking about recognition in terms of, why do we think this particular issue, or why do we think this particular group of people needs to be included and doesn't, can help make sure that decisions aren't being made that just accidentally forgot somebody because they weren't seen as important. Another key way that recognition can help us think about things, this often comes up when we are running models. For instance, we might run an economic model to understand how costs and benefits are going to be distributed. But one of the common things is that not everyone, those models don't always include all the different ways that people are characterized. And by that I might mean, maybe your model includes things like income, or it might include things like access to transit. But if it doesn't include features like language capacity, or if it doesn't include features like, for instance, legality and status, you might miss what your models pick up on in terms of whose concerns matter and whose don't. It's the same thing. I can't say that something's going to have a worse or better effect on women than men if I don't include gender data in my initial set of things. So what data are you going to collect to understand impacts over a long time? How are you going to disaggregate that? Is it going to be gender? Are you going to have ethnicity? Are you going to have racial data? Are you going to have income data? Are you going to have other forms of discrimination or marginalization, or age, for instance, and climate is very important. Things like access to safety equipment if you're an outdoor worker, for instance, which are correlated with ethnicity and often correlated with undocumented status, because many of the people working very vulnerable positions are those who can't advocate for themselves in working situations. Those are really important conversations to build into your plan. This is really common when we talk about things like economic models, because often some of these things are cultural, or they don't fit into the models that we use. And because we rely on certain kinds of models, some of the most important factors that shape who and who is not going to be negatively or positively impacted get forgotten. And so this is an invitation for anyone who's involved in the analysis part to ask themselves, who am I seeing? And am I making sure that all the important characteristics are in this analysis? And if not, are there other kinds of analysis or other kinds of processes I can do to make sure that everyone is seen. The next slide then, Fatima. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up there. I know that was a very high level. I'm very happy to be contacted by people about this, but I hope that those very kind of high level ideas are ones that might not have occurred otherwise and maybe can contribute something productive as you move forward.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing that. I think we're going to move on to the second speaker, and then we'll ask questions at the end. Trevor, you're on. So Trevor is going to be sharing some of the sustainability initiatives that are occurring at the U of A, or University of Arizona. So thank you, Trevor.
All right, thank you, Fatima. And thank you both, Mayor Romero and Sonia, for the words that you just provided. That was all very insightful and all very good information. Do we have my slides, Fatima? Okay. All right, we can just jump into the next one since I know we're a little bit short on time. Again, my name is Trevor Ledbetter, and I'm the director for the Office of Sustainability at the University of Arizona. The mission of the Office of Sustainability is to accelerate institutional sustainability through the collaborative pursuit of interdisciplinary solutions that are environmentally sound, socially just, and economically viable. So our mission is really to address everything that we do from within the office at the triple bottom line sort of concept of sustainability. So to date, a lot of our initiatives have been really heavily focused on the environmental and the economic side of things and less so on the social side of things. But as Sonia just pointed out, it's something that is absolutely critical for us to be incorporating into everything that we do moving forward. And so that's something that we're really looking into much more heavily in as we approach not only the rest of this year, but as we work into some of the initiatives that I'll share with you all today. I'd also like to caveat the fact that the Office of Sustainability is an office of 4. 8 months ago, we were 2 staff and 1 student. So we've grown quite a lot in the last year, and a lot of the things that we have done have been really exciting and really great. But I'd also like to just give a shout out to all of the other different programs, institutes, research, faculty, staff, et cetera, on campus that have been doing really incredible stuff already and will continue to be. And just want to recognize that the Office of Sustainability is a small piece in a very, very large and exciting sort of bigger entity that is environment sustainability at the university. So digging into this first slide, the University of Arizona set a climate neutrality goal of 2050 back in 2015. And in 2018, in our university strategic plan, we actually moved that up to 2040. We are, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, but we are probably one of the largest, if not the largest, institution of higher education in the country that doesn't have a formal sustainability and/or climate action plan to really guide where we've been, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. And so a lot of the stuff that we've been doing in conjunction to what we'll be touching on later has been taking advantage of what has been immediately available to the university. And so one of those was large-scale renewable energy for the university. Moving up our climate neutrality date from 2050 to 2040 in the strategic plan provided us an opportunity that we really couldn't pass up in mitigating the majority, if not all of the emissions resulting from our purchased electricity from Tucson Electric Power. And so in 2018, we started discussions, and in 2019, we actually formally started working with Tucson Electric Power to figure out how we could do that. And at the end of last year, we received approval from the Arizona Corporation Commission to purchase the entirety of our energy from Tucson Electric Power from renewable resources. And so we'll be procuring half of the energy from Tucson Electric Power from the Wilmot Solar Facility in Southeast Tucson, and the other half from the Oso Grande wind project in Southeast New Mexico. We can jump to the next slide. So in addition to sort of that arena and directly addressing the university's greenhouse gas emissions, we're also very interested in taking seriously the need for greater climate action, not only across higher education, but also, of course, within our community. And so in 2018 and really heavily over the last year, the university has been invested in the University Climate Change Coalition, or UC3. This is a coalition of 21 different Tier 1 research institutions across Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and we're joined by ASU up to the north, as well as the University of California system, Ohio State University, the entire New York system, UNAM down in Mexico, University of British Columbia, et cetera. And so the goal of UC3 is to pull from the capacity and the resources of these different institutions and to utilize the network that we have as these knowledge generators to really figure out how we move more quickly towards climate neutrality as a society, and how institutions of higher education can and need to work more closely with their communities to make sure that we can not only deal with the mitigation of the impacts, but also how do we move more quickly to climate neutrality writ large. Next slide. And then central to a lot of our growth in the last year within the Office of Sustainability has been in student engagement. So about a year and a half ago, the University of Arizona Compost Cats program, who many of our listeners may be aware of, moved into the Office of Sustainability, and working much more closely with the city's Environmental Services Department, has been thinking about how we rework composting in the city of Tucson, not only for our commercial partners, our commercial businesses, but also how might we look at residential composting, and how do we start to span some of the challenges that we've seen with our recycling that we're likely to see with composting, and how do we get in front of that while we have the opportunity. So Compost Cats is in the middle of looking at a renewed intergovernmental agreement with environmental services to really figure out how we can support the city and really build out not only education with regard to composting, but waste management and sustainability education more broadly. We're also home to some of our listeners may know Greening the Game is a student program that has been geared towards waste reduction and waste diversion at athletics events on campus. And our green team has been very focused on internal campus operations. And we're actually combining the two of those into the green team this spring and refocusing them to more broad campus initiatives as well as more broad community initiatives. And there's still a lot of opportunity there for us to figure out how we might be able to leverage that to do more community engagement, because it is still very early in that process, but there's a lot going on there. And then we also, like I mentioned at the very beginning, there's a lot of other work happening on campus, not only in the staff and faculty side, but also with our students. And so the Office of Sustainability also advises our largest student group dedicated to sustainability, which is Students for Sustainability. And then the office also helps to coordinate broader student sustainability initiatives, including some with ASU and NAU. Next slide. And then, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, the University of Arizona is also launching into its own sustainability and climate action planning process. This is something highly internal to the university, but through some of the conversations that we've had with community members through UC3, there is a lot of interest both on and off campus in doing some sort of a joint regional climate action plan that, if nothing else, looks at a partnership between the university and the city to advance mutual goals that really hit on some of the things Sonia talked about, as well as some of the things that Mayor Romero talked about. And more internal to the university really looks at how are we advancing sustainability throughout our operations and institutionalizing it in not only there, but also in our academics and our research. And so are we looking at the things that we need to be looking at to move us in the direction we need to be going with climate action? What are the learning outcomes for our students? Are they properly prepared to be taking on the grand challenges that they will be faced regardless of the degree that they receive from the university. Are they prepared to deal with the impacts of climate change? Are they prepared to look at climate change and other challenges through that lens? So, and then next slide. And then finally, I'm also available. My email is tledbetter@arizona.edu, and happy to answer questions and really look to how the Office of Sustainability at the University of Arizona can interface more directly with the community.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you everyone for presenting. We are running a little bit late, but I think we have time for one question that it's for Professor Sonia. In all your years in research and practice, have you observed any cities being intentional in building justice into their climate change policies? And if so, what are some examples of the cities that have successfully centered justice in their climate action plan? What can we learn from there? Like the big takeaways that Tucson could really embrace. If you could share that, and in coordination with that, how could the university and the Office of Sustainability help in that area as well?
Sure. I'll be really quick. I actually think there's the good thing is there's so many cities out there that are trying to do this, that there's actually, your bigger problem is everyone's trying in some capacity, and the biggest problem is going to be which lessons make sense. I would actually direct you to the Transition Town Initiative as a very inclusive attempt at building a network of cities that can support each other. One of the lessons that we've learned is that it's really useful for cities to learn from each other in peer-to-peer relationships, because you're the ones that best understand how to work across in the city structure. And so instead of giving you a list of cities, what I would recommend people to do and listeners to do is to go check out the Transition Town Initiative. It involves literally 100 cities. They've been doing this over 10 years. So it's a collection of experience. From them, their big #1 takeaway is all about the inclusivity of planning from the beginning. Since every city is so unique, the #1 take home is trying to develop an inclusive process from the very beginning that starts with where people are, what people are worried about, what your vulnerabilities are, what your resources are, and really tries to do that. So that's, I think, a particularly great network. And then linked to that is really the learning that can be done from city to city as a really central element of supporting this and helping move the political conversation, as well as pointing out just how widespread city action on climate is.
Thank you. Trevor, do you have any advice on how the Office of Sustainability could be incorporated in this kind of initiatives, inclusive initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I mean, as we've talked a little bit about, Fatima, I think there's a lot more that the university can and needs to be doing in the way of an inclusive approach to the University Climate Change Coalition initiatives that we've held so far, as well as we start to build into the our own sustainability and climate action plan. I think that that there's a lot of opportunity in utilizing our students across campus to assist in some of these processes. A story that always just sort of boggles my mind. We had a faculty member on campus who was talking to one of their senior students. They'd been in Tucson for 4 years, and they had never been further west than Euclid. I think all of us are aware that that's one of the campus boundaries, to not have gone to 4th or to downtown Tucson, to so many other parts of the city. It just really kind of put into perspective, we need to be doing more as an institution to interface with the community, not only through our teaching, but also just getting people off campus and integrating them into the community in a way that builds more connections between the university and the community, but also does so in a way that takes into account the fact that so much research happens a lot of research. I don't want to overgeneralize, but a lot of research and a lot of our outreach as an institution does not occur in our more vulnerable populations. It doesn't occur in South Tucson. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities there that we can start to address by working first through our students.
Thank you. Mayor, do you have any last questions for us? Or words?
I just want to thank everyone on the panel, Dr. Klinsky and Trevor from the University of Arizona. I'm looking forward to continued partnership because, as I said earlier, I know that there's research that both ASU and U of A have, and we want to take that research and put it into action in the city of Tucson. And like I said, with an eye to equity and justice. And so it was wonderful hearing from both Trevor and Dr. Klinsky on how to go about this process. I'm dying to hear from the second panel, so I won't delay anymore, but I just want to thank everyone that's joined our webinar and to let you know that this is just the beginning of a conversation that we will continue to have in the city of Tucson, and that I'm looking forward to doing some really good things in partnership and solidarity with all of you.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, we're gonna move on to the next session. We were gonna take a 5-minute break, but that's not happening. So I want to invite all the panelists for the second session. If you could show your video, that would be great, so we can see you. Let's see. I'll give you guys a minute to get settled in. Well, thank you. I want to thank everybody for staying connected, and also welcome the ones, those of you who are just joining now. For the second session, we invited, and let me see, can you all see? I don't see their videos. Can you see them?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, you can see them? Okay. Are the second panelists able to show your video so that we can see your beautiful faces? Yeah, no? Let me see. Let me see.
No, mine's on Fatima. This is
Oh, there she is.
Okay, perfect. So you can hear me well. All right, so for our second session, we invited, oh, perfect, nice. We invited a group of environmental stewards who are on the ground advocating for environmental sustainability from different angles. So I would let them, so we would be doing introductions from each panelist, followed by a round table of discussions, including a poll. And we will finish with a few questions from the audience if we have time. I hope we do. And so I want to invite all the panelists from the second session to introduce themselves, tell us their name, tell us about the group or organization that you represent, its mission, and the impact that your group or organization is having in the community. I think it'll be great if you can show your video, but if not, it's okay. We can start with the youngest, with our youngest panelist, Chris Allen. If you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, the group you represent, and the impact that it's having in our community.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Chris Allen. I'm a high school sophomore, and I work with Arizona Youth Climate Coalition. And we're an organization that has representatives from all across the state. And our goal is to do whatever we can from the lobbying side of things to ensure that climate change action is taken to mitigate climate change and ensure there's a just transition into a sustainable future. And we're doing a lot for Earth Week, especially through digital actions. We've had webinars, we're doing actions to email politicians, polluters, things like that. And we're just trying to do whatever impact we can digitally, and then moving forward when we can return to physical action, we hope to have a big presence there too. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Sandy, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sandy Barr. I'm the chapter director for Sierra Club's Grand Canyon chapter. That's the Arizona chapter. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm actually sitting here in Phoenix on traditional lands of the Acamol, Autumn, and Peaposh. And I wanted to first thank the mayor and Fatima for inviting me to be part of this, and also for making climate a huge priority. I think that, you know, we've seen many times with communities lip service, or in the case of the state, not even lip service. So it is actually very exciting to see it move beyond that. And so anyway, I just wanted to thank you for the commitment and for really kicking off this 50th anniversary of Earth Day with this great discussion. Enjoyed hearing more from the first panelists as well. We work a lot on policy issues, and including trying to get good policies passed by the Arizona legislature and at the Arizona Corporation Commission. And I guess the main thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that those policies have significant impact on Tucson. I know sometimes it would be nice if Tucson could ignore everything north of the Gila, but it does affect what we can and do in the community. And so frequently throughout the years, there have been attempts to specifically limit Tucson and Pima County's ability to do things. And we just saw this last legislative session measure passed that does limit what the community can do on climate change. So I think it's important to try to keep those types of measures from passing and to work on things that can further empower our cities, including Tucson, to make sure that there is a strong and equitable climate plan for the community. So I think I'll just leave it at that for now. I'm looking forward to getting into questions. And again, it's great to be part of this.
Thank you, Sandy. Vanessa, are you connected, and can you go next?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. I just want to thank you very much for including me on this discussion. I enjoyed very much the first panel, and I'm just very happy to be with like-minded individuals talking about something I'm very passionate about. And first and foremost, right, happy Earth Day, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your day. But yes, so my name is Vanessa Gallego. I am second generation scrap metal recycler. I am chief operating officer of my family business, which is Recycle Inc., scrap metal recycling. 34 years of diverting metals from our landfill in Southern Arizona. So when I'm not doing that, I donate a lot of my time with groups and organizations that work around sustainability. One of them is BICAS. I'm a board member, very proud of Bicycle Intercommunity Art and Salvage. And the other one is FUGA, Familias Unidas Ganando Accesibilidad, which is a mobility justice group that works out of the south side and southwest side of Tucson.
Awesome. Thank you for introducing yourself. Tito, are you connected, and can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Hi, everyone. Can you see me?
No.
I don't know how to work this.
I can see you.
Huh. So it seems like some folks can and some can't. But hi, everyone. My name is Tito Romero. I am a member of Flowers and Bullets Collective, born and raised in Barrio Centro. Our main mission is to use sustainability and art to reclaim our cultural roots and empower our neighborhood. And our main focus, primarily main focus, is our own community in Barrio Centro. So thank you all very much for having me. Thank you, Mayor Romero and Fatima, for inviting me onto this panel, and honored to be on this panel with so many good people here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tito. Laura?
Thank you, Fatima. Hi, all. It is such an honor to be part of this panel. And thank you, Mayor Romero, for your leadership on climate and environment. It's really exciting to see coming out of our state. So my name is Laura Dent. I'm the Executive Director of Chispa Arizona. Chispa means spark in Spanish, and we are a program of the League of Conservation Voters. Our mission is to build Latino political power to move the needle on climate change and fight for a cleaner, healthier future. We know that our community cares more about climate change issues, wants to see more action taken, both at the federal and the state level to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. And we're also disproportionately impacted by that same challenge. And so the gap really that we see is the political power of our community to be part of the solutions, be part of the decision-making spaces, and the conversations where we find just outcomes to some of the challenges that we're dealing with. So our organization does that in a handful of ways. Through our family of organizations, we focus on civic engagement, making sure that everybody has a voice in the democratic process, and we're expanding and growing our electorate, making sure young people, Latinos, people of color, have an adequate say, right, in the political process and have a voice. We build on grassroots organizing work, leadership development within our community, education around how to interface with the political process, what decisions get made where, and how to be part of those. And we do it through direct advocacy, making sure that we're showing up on the issues that we care about at the state and local level, and that we're supporting the folks that care about protecting our environment for generations to come. So really honored to be here and to be part of the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie, are you connected?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Oh, I see you now. Okay, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Fatima and Mayor Romero. We are honored to be here today, and we are deeply committed to this partnership with all of you in addressing climate and environment. Tucson Clean and Beautiful is a 35-year-old community organization dedicated to environmental action. We have several programs, including our Adopt a Public Space program for one-time and ongoing cleanups of public spaces. We address invasive species, especially bufflegrass. We have an environmental education program on waste reduction and hold various collection events such as e-waste. And we are most importantly here today, our Trees for Tucson program. And we are very committed to the Million Trees campaign, and very appreciative of Mayor Romero's leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. It is really an honor to have all of you here today. We admire the work that you do to make our communities more beautiful and greener and climate resilient from, the different trincheras or the different areas of work. So actually, given the diversity in the work that you all do, I'm curious to know what inspired you to do what you're currently doing. If you can share 1 minute, what was that moment that, you realized that this is what you wanted to be doing, really quickly.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm inspired by our community. The Tucson community is an amazing place, and coupled with the power of trees to do so much for us all at once, to help the environment, provide habitat. I think if you can think about just about any problem, trees can be part of the solution. And that's what I'm most excited about. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
This is Sandy. Well, I guess I would just jump in and say real quickly, the Sonoran Desert inspired me to do this work. I did not grow up here. I've lived here for most of my life, but I just fell in love with the Sonoran Desert and felt like it was, that a lot of people who did come here from other places didn't really appreciate it. It's this diverse, wonderful place, the people, the plants, the animals. And so I'm still in love with the Sonoran Desert, and that's why I do this.
Awesome. Laura?
Sure, thank you. I think a range of opportunities. To be really honest with you, the mainstream environmental movement has not always spoken to me. And I think that's actually what invited me more than anything into the idea of joining the team, which is Parizona, because the mission and focus is really on building our community's political power. Because when you're strong and you know your voice and you have a voice in the process, that impacts our environment, but that also impacts a host of other issues, including quality of life across the board. And so for me, I really feel like we cannot have the environmental movement continue as it has historically. It's not been inclusive enough. It's not been speaking to enough people, and it's not really been meeting all communities where they're at. And we don't have enough time. Not only is it a moral imperative for us to get that right, making sure that we're engaging with the folks that are most impacted, but there's just not enough time to not do that. And so for me, that has been really inspiring. I'm also really inspired by local action happening across the country. We've obviously seen a lot of federal obstructionism at the national level around protecting our communities, protecting our health, and seeing the kind of bubbling up of change makers across the country at the state level, at the local level, standing up and setting a tone and putting pressure on the folks that really should be driving this conversation and leadership is really inspiring for me.
Thank you. Tito?
Yeah, so as a teenager, I went to Tucson High, and I was really, really privileged to take the Mexican American Studies courses. And in those courses, the big thing that stood out to me is the exposure that I got. I was introduced to so many community groups here in Tucson doing so much good work, activists, organizers. And from there, I was able to be exposed to other youth groups doing amazing work all across the country, from the Bay all the way to DC. But the major thing that stuck is when I would come back home, we wouldn't have any of that here in my neighborhood. No access to healthy food, no murals. We didn't see ourselves in the stories. Yeah, so these kids all over the country, they'll have radio shows, murals, their own youth centers, taking up space, gardens, their own restaurants. Like, it was amazing. So my mind was blown, and I knew what was capable. And it wasn't until 2012 we actually built the confidence to do it for ourselves. And many of us that are part of Flowers and Bullets, we come from this community, so if we weren't going to do it, nobody else is. And now that we're the parents, and we're going to be the parents, I want to see my and enjoy the neighborhood in a whole different way. We knew what we got ourselves into in the community, and it was just nothing but trouble, so we're hoping that our efforts help those nanas and tios and tias and our community members, because overall those are the people who are we're serving, people that we grew up with, our friends, their kids. Yeah, it's a big family around here, it's a lot of intergenerational families. So this doesn't feel like a job. It doesn't feel like activism or organizing. It does feel like a responsibility for our neighborhood.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I'd say what got me into like the climate activism movement is kind of just like when I started to learn about climate change, I was like in the incoming climate crisis, I was like super concerned, because 50 years from now, I want to see a world in which I can live without the fear of my friends, my community being wiped out by climate change. And the minute I started like learning about like all these different interconnected like web of climate organizations and activist organizations, I just kind of felt it was almost my responsibility to like my future and to like the future of the kids I'm going to have one day, like to join these movements and to fight for a better future. So that to me was kind of what inspired me to join.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, everyone. Those are really cool stories. Thanks for sharing them. My second question ties back to the first session and the intersectionality of justice and climate change. So from your perspective, what would it take to have a collective, inclusive process leading the city of Tucson to be climate resilient? And anybody can jump in. Sandy?
Sure. Well, I think that one of the things that is required, and I know that there's a commitment, is centering the work on equity, right? And Laura mentioned this in her comments, but you know, too often in the environmental movement, we've separated out issues and acted like that somehow you could have a healthy environment without having a healthy democracy and without having equity and justice in the work. And so I feel like as starting from there, and of course, making sure that all of the voices are heard and are there from the beginning, and not, you know, and not brought in as an add-on or an afterthought, and both providing an opportunity for those voices, but also really listening and not just going, well, that is too hard or too expensive, you know, right away, and dismissing things, because, like, you know, that has happened on the national level to some degree with Green New Deal. There, it's always too expensive. It's like somehow it's this radical idea, when the bottom line is it's centering everything on equity, justice, and addressing climate. So I think, yeah, I think that's what where I would go.
Thank you. Anybody else? Vanessa, maybe?
Hi, certainly. I echo what Sandy is saying. We do have to center the conversation around equity. And the other thing that was echoed from the first session is knowing the community and reaching out to the community. So working within the framework, working with organizations who are established, who have trust, who already have these connecting resources that are able to be advocates, right? And to be able to educate. Other things like that would include what they were mentioning in the first, which was having access to childcare, access to food, and knowing the community, you know, you're going to be advocating for. And in Tucson, it's the South Side, you know, a lot that gets left behind. So definitely making sure that those areas who have been historically left behind really lead the forefront on this. So that's what I can add.
Thank you.
I also echo with what Vanessa said. The folks doing the work and the folks most affected need to be on the table. Time after time, you know, it's just historically been left out. Even if we start talking about like our farmers, these incentives, rebates, everything that's going on right now, we can't take advantage of those things if we can't afford them. We can't advocate for our communities to walk the streets more if our streets aren't safe, and that's because of substance abuse and X, Y, and Z, right? So like we have to really talk to the folks who are doing the work and are most affected, because those are the folks that have the answers, because they see those issues on the day-to-day, and we're out there addressing them, you know, with very, very little resources. So that's what I would also push for.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I would like to just add something, Fatima, that to echo on what Tito just said, is that really that all of us are activists, and you know, at the heart of that is really action. And now is the time for action. And as you know, the mayor always says, somos uno, you know, we need to start now and work together and take action. And we should start where the disparities are the greatest. You know, we should be going into the communities and working with the communities, and they should be leading the process and should have voice and representation. And that's where we need to start our work.
Thank you. Anybody else before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, Fatima, this is Laura. I would just plus one to all of the panelists that have referenced the need to make sure that we're engaging with community when we're developing solutions, but also just thinking about coordination. I think there's a lot of power in working with other municipalities that have engaged in like equitable environmental justice initiatives and programming to take away lessons learned, to like work collaboratively. I've been really inspired by Mayor Romero's leadership, as well as Mayor Gallego and Mayor Evans, on some of the actions that we've seen with regard to making the democratic process more accessible, allowing voters to sign petitions in anticipation of November, knowing that we're in the middle of a crisis and we have to be able to like manage and adapt so that folks have a say in the process. I think very similarly, there's a lot of power in working in coordination to advance sustainability initiatives, justice initiatives, democracy initiatives, and put upward pressure on the federal leaders that are failing us. I mean, I think we have a whole lot of room to do that right now. And with many voices together, I think we're stronger in that way.
Thank you. Okay, I think I'm gonna, the last question that I have was developed based on the question that is part of the form that you all signed to register. And I use the responses to create a short poll. And I want to take a moment for everybody actually who's also participating in the audience and including the panelists to respond to the poll. And let me just share with you. And can you see it? All right, I'll just put it over here. So the question is, from your perspective, what are the most pressing issues that Tucson needs to focus, and I would add right now, to become more climate resilient? And these questions or these options basically were compiled from the form that you all signed, and they're not perfect. It only lets me out a certain number of multiple choices. But if you can select the top 3 that you have, and so that we have some variability, and just to give us an idea, you know, what are people thinking? And then we'll discuss in a little bit. So we'll take a minute for folks to answer. And yeah, so we'll just take a minute and then we'll end the poll. So top 3 priorities. If you could only choose 3. And it seems like people stopped voting. Oh no, they're still voting. One more minute, one more second.
It doesn't let me click on anything.
Oh, it doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, the host can't vote.
Oh, I apologize for that. Well, actually, they'll be good because we're going to discuss if they're aligned with your own ideas. So I think, does anybody else? Okay, so we're still voting. But can you see the poll? Okay. So we'll just give it one more second. Yeah, it seems that people stopped voting. So we're gonna leave it at that. It's actually a 65% response rate, which is not too bad. Okay. So let's share the result. Do you see them? Okay, so it seems that water management, rainwater harvesting, and green infrastructure is the highest rank or the highest priority for this group, followed by renewable, clean, and solar energy. And then on the third round, we have food security and environmental justice as third place. Urban forestry. So is this something that you all think, or is this aligned with your priorities? And I'm asking the panelists. I mean, 65% of the participants responded this. Is this kind of like where you see yourself leading towards? I mean, water management is that your number one priority? What are the difference? Why or why not? Any comments?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing. Tito here. Yeah, a lot of these things are things that Flowers and Bullets is addressing. For us, we do consider it like low-hanging fruit, something that is somewhat affordable, something that our community can understand. So rainwater harvesting, food production, politicizing our neighbors as far as like what's accessible, what's out there, what kind of rebates are out there. But everything is so interconnected that it's so hard to like vote for one, you know? So like, how do we push for these, for like emissions and lowering the emissions if we don't really have good bus stops? How do we so like the list goes on, you know? So to me, it's really hard to say like these are the exact ones. But for Flowers and Bullets, like we have been focusing a lot on like politicizing our neighbors, food production, and then rainwater harvesting. Even in those categories alone, there's such like a huge disparity that's going on like in Tucson. So we go to the far north side, people that can't afford the rebate are using the rebate, but people like in Central or in the south side think rainwater harvesting is illegal. So even at that alone, there's so much work in that topic alone that needs to be done, you know? So, but it is so interconnected. But for us, those are definitely like big pillars. And from there, those are just the excuse for us. Like with those things, you can talk about climate justice. You can talk about like why are these reasons happening in our communities. You can like start posing these questions. So food and art for us is the excuse to be talking about just much deeper issues for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. They're so intertwined that it's almost difficult to address one without the other. Yeah, Vanessa, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, certainly. Just wanted to chime in. I'm surprised how public transportation, mobility, walkability, and biking score so low. And I kind of wonder, you know, the percentage of people who are voting too, right? And in the sense that the fact that I worked with mobility issues in the South Side and now moving towards the Southwest and trying to encompassing a lot of areas that have been historically left behind, echoing what Tito's saying, it's hard to pick one of them when they're so interconnected. You know, when we invest in public transit and mobility, walkability, that directly helps with not only the less cars on the road, but also like how we move in our own places. So it's very interesting to see here, like the scoring on where we as Tucson decide where we put our resources in. And that's where the whole point of equity comes in. And I love how there's 40% chiming in for equity and inclusion, because these are the places where we're going to be able to hit those things. So.
Yeah, Vanessa, go ahead, Laura.
Oh, sorry. I was going to agree. I feel like this is a pretty accurate microcosm of like how decisions get made in some of these like spaces, because like who's watching the webinar, maybe not the person taking the bus to work. Because I agree, Vanessa, I was like, oh, that's lower than it should be. So I think it's just like a helpful tool to be thinking about how we engage folks, even through like traditional means that cities use around neighborhood association meetings. Some neighborhood associations you go to are unreflective of the communities as a whole. So I echo that observation as well.
And I was just going to add, they are all connected. And if you address transit and mobility issues, you're going to help reduce emissions and you'll have better air quality. And so to me, I'm like, well, if we could do that, then we're going to address all those other things. So I'm always looking at what issues will leverage us all those other things. So
Yeah, how can we stacking functions, y'all?
That's actually a really good question. Like, how do we, you know, from all of these different perspectives, all of these groups that we're coming from, how can we work together to precisely do that, stack those functions? And what would be like the first step? I know that including everybody from the beginning is like key. So what do you, like, how do you even begin that process? In your years of experience working on the ground, like even working on the ground, you have people that are not, they don't have access to go to these meetings. So like, how do you, from all of those of you working on the ground, do you have inclusive process within your missions and your activities that could be, you know, make or duplicate at the city level?
Well, it's a strategic initiative of ours to diversify our organization. We've been predominantly very white and also much older. And so we're definitely hiring folks that represent the communities that we're working in. And we're also going to be working with youth, or especially the youth in the Sunnyside School District, which is in the very neighborhoods where the tree canopy is lowest. So our goal is to have youth from those communities lead the process, recruit the neighborhoods and the neighbors who will have trees planted in their communities, and then to come out with volunteers and back it up with action. And then to come back again and again and keep planting and keep supporting the trees that have been planted, helping with tree care. And, you know, I see how important green infrastructure is on that, ensuring folks that we have the water to grow these trees, that we're planting the appropriate species in the right place so that they don't get damaged. So, yeah, we have to let the communities that we're working in lead the process. And if they don't want trees, then we're gonna have to figure something else out.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, it's Vanessa. I think one thing that we have to make light of is how our ways that we use to communicate with the community, especially communities that are vulnerable, just became more vulnerable, right? So I don't know, we don't know how long COVID-19 might affect us and what other, you know, diseases might be coming our way because of climate action, but this is going to directly impact how we work in our communities as well, and how those communities who already don't have access to the internet, don't have access to certain platforms to be able to be educated, now physically can't go to places to hear, you know, about the work that we want input in, you know. So I just want to make note of that, because the way we work grassroots is face-to-face, direct contact, going to people's homes, you know, and gaining that trust. And just what COVID-19 is doing right now to our communities, how much or less connected will they be?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a challenging time. And it's also like an opportunity for, you know, whenever crises like this happen, it also provides the opportunity to be creative, innovative, and we're resilient. So we find solutions. I myself am in the process of finding those solutions, how to continue to move forward the mayor's environmental agenda as we are, facing this current situation. So yeah, that is a very good point, but I do think that, we are, our ancestors have all these years of resistance, and we will continue to resist, and we will come stronger at the end. And it is an opportunity to find creative solutions, innovative solutions, and collaboration. And also it is an opportunity, given that, the limited resources, to have a collective agenda for collective actions and collective efforts. I think pulling together all the resources together right now, it's key, and will continue to be key as we move forward into the near future.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's one of the things that AZYCC is focusing on right now, is like, how can we find solutions that like for example, like with COVID-19, like how can we find solutions that not only help us get out of this situation we're in right now with COVID, but how can those solutions also help us deter climate change and help mitigate climate change? Like, we're thinking about, okay, so you have the economy crashing right now. Like, these people are going to need jobs, and we're looking at, okay, we're trying to help convince legislators that maybe we can provide these people jobs with making solar panels, constructing wind farms, stuff like that. That's also going to help mitigate the climate crisis. So yeah, that's definitely one of the big things we're looking at right now too. So
I guess we're kind of getting into the how, right? How are our groups kind of addressing these, or we're going about it. Flowers and Bullets is a very, very optimistic group, and sometimes we take up a bigger we can choose sometimes. But what people don't realize is that we are collective, and we work independently in these different groups. So we have a rainwater harvesting group that's responsible for fronting up to $6,000 at one time. So while we're processing one payment, getting the paperwork for another rainwater harvesting system is going into the community. So we're up to 16 now, and each house has up to 1,550 gallons tanks. We also have a 9.5 acre farm where we are making food accessible, affordable. And not only that farm used to be our old elementary school. So when that elementary school closed down, that was our neighborhood hub. That was our Christmas parties, Halloween parties, vaccination center, voting booth, everything, right? 2 meals a day for our kids. But that's still in our memory. So a lot of families still look at this at the farm as a place to go get resources, information. So we still have people stopping by right now. So we've turned a lot of our efforts into a COVID relief response team now, because of everybody coming to the farm asking for resources and just asking questions. We also have a grant funding team, which is responsible to finding our resources and opportunities out there for us. And then we also have an outreach team that's responsible for all our neighborhood fiestas, movie nights, celebrations, info sessions. So yeah, we've been really, really instrumental on moving the community and making a lot of these things very affordable and accessible. But yeah, not only that, we would hope to be a template across the country and across Tucson of what you can do to vacant properties, what you can do if you come to a community that you're tied to. We're having a lot of good impact, but some of the stuff that we're having, the impact we're having is stuff that you can't measure, so that's the thing that we're doing. So we're trying to pivot and finding surveys and different ways to measure the impacts that we are having, because the stuff that we're having is the kids coming in to feel safe at the school. It's not necessarily what our funders were hoping for, but there's a lot of different things that are happening now at the farm because there's a central location of people that they trust, that look like you, talk like you, and that come from the place that you come from, So I think that's part of the magic, to be able to create some of these hubs, create some of these places in your own communities, and yeah, look for what we're doing as a template, So back to pulling those resources and allocating those funds to those people who are actually doing those work. Because when I donate to these huge nonprofits, I don't know where my money's going, and the neighborhood still stays the same. But when you start donating to groups like Fuga, Bikist, Flowers and Bullets, other people on the ground, that money starts stretching. So your investment's actually going somewhere, you know? So that tree that we said we're gonna plant, we're actually gonna probably buy 3 with the money that you gave us for 1, you know? So that's how like you start making things happen. Like, and these communities, these underserved, poor communities, that's where hustling happens. That's where like stretching of the dollar happens. That's where innovation happens. So if you want to see your money stretch, like keep like funding and allocating resources to the people actually doing the work. That's working, you know what I mean? That you see actual impact.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I agree. I mean, in terms of the metrics, sometimes, you know, we are so caught up in having metrics that are hard and that are, you know, very scientific based, which is important. Like science is very important, especially as we work with climate change and solutions for climate change. It is important to track and measure our progress, the progress that we're doing based on our goals, based on our targets. But at the same time, like those not measurable outcomes, those positive impacts that come from the ground are also very important, and finding ways to also track those, it would be, yeah, really good, and it's very valuable. So not just like the hard science, but also the positive benefits, the positive externalities of like all these community work. It's very, very important, and trickling down those benefits, or those, yeah, those monies down to the communities that are doing that work.
One thing I kind of connecting to that, and thinking about, you know, the qualitative versus quantitative aspects, you know, because we really can't be out in the communities knocking on doors, you know, talking about elections or issues or participating in climate action plan. You know, we have to look at some other tools. And so the other day I was doing phone banking, which I really try to avoid because I like talking to people in person instead of phoning. So I made 50 calls and I talked to only 2 people. But those 2 conversations were great. And so I think, you know, when we're thinking about connecting, you know, maybe, you know, think that, you know, the 2 conversations are worth it, and that we may need to look at using some tools that we either don't like using or haven't used as much to connect during this time. So.
Thank you. I am looking at the comments from the public. There are more comments. Let me see if I find any questions. They're more like comments, but there's a question from, I'm sorry, let me just skip this. There's a question from Joseph Sisling, and the question is, how do we move forward the progressive agenda in critical areas? Let's see. I don't know if I understand like what the critical areas are referring to, but basically, like, I think we already touched upon some of these talking points. How do we move forward in the critical areas? Maybe the ones that we selected. I don't know. What do you all think? I don't know if I'm understanding the question correctly. Let me see. Is there any other questions? There's just comments thanking us for the webinar. People leaving their emails. People saying that, you know, I need to get some trees from Trees for Tucson. Okay, so yeah, Yuri Anderson, it's advocating for 100% renewable energy by 2030. Yeah, so those are some of the comments. Do you have any, we're almost close to our end. I was scheduled to end at 2:30, but I want to open it up for last minute comments, suggestions, and I also, want to share that this is the beginning of a conversation that we want to continue to have. We do appreciate community input. I myself come from the nonprofit sector. I have done a lot of community engagement, and that's where my heart is at. So I have that very front and center. And do you have any last comments, last suggestions before we close the webinar? I think some of the comments on the chat room are more comments and questions, but I'd love to hear from you. Yeah.
I just want to start by just thanking the mayor's office just so much for having us all out here, and I really appreciate it, and I'm really proud to live in a city where we are progressive about issues like climate, and we are working for the citizens, of the city. And I just want to thank you. And if there's anything you need from ACYCC or anything else that any of the other organizations need from us, we're happy to help, and we'd love to make as big of a difference as we can. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely want to collaborate. We believe in collective action, a collective agenda, and collective efforts. That's all going to be very critical as we move forward, especially during this time. So yes, we would be reaching out to many of you as we move forward. But thank you for offering that.
This is Vanessa here. So again, I'm with FUGA, Familias Unidas Ganando Accesibilidad. And when it's safe for us again, we will start resuming our last Friday of the month rides that are held at the Pueblo Center on the south side of Tucson, where we meet at 6 o'clock and we ride to bring the issues of critical mass, right? And about mobility on the south side. So when it's safe for us again, I hope you follow us and join us on the south side Friday at 6 p.m., last Friday of the month. And with that, I hope y'all get some time to enjoy this beautiful weather outside and enjoy your Earth Day. And thank you again for having us.
Hi. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Go ahead, Sandy. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say thanks and appreciate all the great work, everyone that's part of the panel, and a lot of the people who are asking questions and giving comments, all the great work you're doing to make Tucson an equitable and really resilient community. There's just some really amazing work going on, and despite what's happening right now, people are continuing. So thank you for doing all of that. I just wanted to say that we're always happy to collaborate and work together. And if people have ideas, let me know. And I wanted to mention that we do have a couple of staff people based in Tucson, Catalina Ross, who is working on energy issues and really focusing on getting Tucson Electric Power to not get 80% of its electricity from fossil fuels, in case you didn't know that. And then Dan Millis, who does our Borderlands campaign. So I am happy to also volunteer them for collaboration, and just wanted to say thanks again to the mayor and Fatima, and also thank the mayor for hiring Fatima, because she is excellent. So.
I echo that. I've really enjoyed the beginning of working with Fatima and look forward to a great working relationship. And to remind everybody that we need to take collective action, but also individual action. There's so much we can do every day in our own lives to have an impact, to reduce waste, to drive less, to pick up litter, to volunteer, to vote, to plant trees, to engage youth and children in all of this as well. If you didn't know, there's a season to plant trees. We plant in the fall is the best time to plant, and in the spring is the second best time. The summer is not a great time. So we're gearing up for a really big fall planting season. And we would love for you to join us as volunteers. If you'd like to become a tree leader, to lead volunteers. And if you want trees in your neighborhood, we will be focusing on low canopy communities. We will look forward to seeing you very soon, and we're definitely modifying our procedures to make sure that we're safe from virus, and with it, like washable gloves and wiping down tools and maintaining distance. So I expect we'll be able to go full force even with the pandemic when it's still with us. So thank you, Fatima, and thank you, Mayor Romero. We look forward to working together.
Yeah, Tito here. So yeah, we're not an outside agency that came in and saved the day. You know, if our funding is up, we're still going to be in the neighborhood. Those folks that we're talking about who are dealing with substance abuse or whatnot, when we look out the window, those are our best friends that we had, you know, growing up in X, Y, and Z, you know? So it's almost like a silver lining, everything that's going on right now, because everyone's going back to those basics, going back to those things that matter, you know, farming, community, helping each other out. So it's been beautiful to see how that's coming together and people coming together. So, but yeah, we really hope that our efforts continue on. They're long lasting. Many of our members have been volunteering for 8+ years, you know, all volunteers. So again, if there's any resources out there, any collaborations out there, any free trees out there, nudge, out there, we have the homes, we have the support, we have the community, we have the neighborhood, we have the space. If y'all ever need a place to when this blows over, a place to have community gatherings, meetings, please, you know, use our space. Let's see ourselves in that farm, because it's going to be a very, very important place for many of us in the future. You know, if it's not going to be our physical place to work ourselves, it's going to be a very, very big template to look after and to use as a reference to build other places. So please stop on by, come check us out. But I would look forward to helping you all out and supporting you all in anything you all need. Thank you.
Thank you. I just, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to thank all of the panelists. It's been great to hear all of your perspectives, and thank you, Mayor Romero. Happy Earth Day to everyone. Just wanted to put out there that if you post pics with the hashtag Earth Day AZ, we'll hit you with the link so you can join our list to learn a little bit more about Chispa, Arizona, and the voter registration work, the leadership development work, and the advocacy that we're trying to move at the state and local level for a cleaner future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly acknowledge some of the questions folks are asking about the climate emergency declaration and like having the city, you know, renewable energy. And I just wanted to share that yesterday, Mayor and Council passed a resolution calling on the Arizona Corporation Commission to adopt clean energy standard of 100% by 2050. And that is a great step moving forward in terms of like pushing the statewide action as a commission considers a target for the next decade. So that's a great step. And in terms of the climate emergency declaration, is still a top priority for our office. But given the current situation, it's been on hold for a little bit. However, we will continue to work on it. We are drafting a language that is meaningful and that has the foundation with actions and metrics that could be beneficial for the long term. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And any last words from Chris? I think you're the last one. No?
Yeah, I spoke, guys. Yeah, thank you for everything and like doing everything for the climate and stuff. So yeah. Happy Earth Day, everyone.
Happy Earth Day. Mayor, you still connected? Do you want to say any last words to the group?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you all for being a panelist in our webinar. Like I said earlier, this is only the beginning conversation. We must add the voices of the most vulnerable community into our discussion, and that as I acknowledge the time, you know, the time, the crisis that we're going through right now, that our goals of putting together a climate action plan for the city of Tucson and our sustainability goals are still very present, and we're going to continue pushing. I'm very happy that I was lucky enough to have Fatima join our team. She is going to be dedicated to our sustainability goals, and that we are in the process of putting together a representative list of names of individuals that will be part of our task force, our advisory task force for the mayor's office and for the city of Tucson. So again, this is only the beginning, and we are so lucky to have a community in Tucson that is so interested in climate resiliency and sustainability and environmental goals. And so I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Those of you that submitted questions and for one reason or the other, we didn't have the opportunity to answer, we will connect with you and try and answer those questions separately. But stay tuned, and happy Earth Day, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy Earth Day to everybody. All the panelists were great. Thank you for your time and for sharing your insights and your experience. It is important for us to listen to experts, practitioners, but most importantly, like the people on the ground that are doing the day-to-day work. So thank you. We want to continue this conversation and work together as we plan, design, implement, and monitor our progress in environmental sustainability and climate justice. So thank you for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Happy Earth Day.
Bye.
Bye.